Okay, cool. Okay, so we're recording now. Cool. Yeah, so the quiz is pretty simple. And again, I'm gonna I think moving forward, homework should be easier. We can finish it quickly, and so we can move forward. But as we go, I think move uh, into more complex stuff in JavaScript, we can look at something. At that point, we will have something more um, concrete to work on. Okay. Um, so okay, cool. So let's get started. Any question before we start? All right. Cool. Let me share my screen. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes, just because it.
All right. Okay. So as we covered last time, make sure that in the code pen, you can create an account, so you can save your all your pens, what they call it, like code snippets, basically. Right. So I'm gonna do that. I usually use like a GitHub, but you can use your Gmail to log in. So if you're already logged in into Gmail, all you have to do is just click on it, and you will be automatically logged in. Um, the cool thing about this is it will remember all your pin, but a lot of times when I create it, I don't title it because it's for the class, but I would suggest that you should name it. Like for example, here it's from like few years back. I've created a Simon Says application and at least some CSS stuff here, and it's here. So this way you can look at your work um, and name it. So to name it, what you need to do is create a pen. Make sure you first log in, right? And then you would click here, and then I can say my um, I don't know, pen, or my first pen. Okay. Again, this is kind of not very meaningful, but because we haven't decided exactly what we did. Uh, but hold on, let me see. Okay. Uh, oh, did I stop sharing? Oops. Okay, let me go back and share. All right. So yeah, you would see your pen here, named it, and if I go back again in my um, your in your work, and then you have to leave the pen, and you would see that. um, Again, what it would do, it would put the more frequently visited one first. So I can just search on it. My first pen thing. Let's see. Hmm, interesting. We did not save. Oh, maybe I did not save. That's why. Okay, let's do it again. So if I go here and my first pen, okay, and then I have to click on save here. Okay, and then if I go back and look at here, yeah, then you would see my first pen here on the top. Okay, so this is how you can uh, name your work. And I would suggest as we learn every step of the way, create a new one, name it, so you have all the history in a chronological order, so you can see what you've done. Okay. So okay, so before we start, I always do a few things. So I would always click on the console and then show the console here, and then hide the HTML and CSS for now, right? Because we're not going to touch it now because we're focusing on JavaScript. Later on, when we need, we can open it again. And then I would go on the settings, and then I would click on the behavior. And then there is something called auto updating. This one, you want to turn it off. Okay. And I'll show you why. So all you have to do is go to the settings, go to the behavior, and then turn the auto updating preview. What happens is that as you type things here, um, CodePen automatically is constantly compiling. Okay, basically running your code, whatever you type it executes it. So let's say and then the way it does is if you as you're typing, as you pause for a few seconds, at that time it thinks you're done, so it will execute it. But what if in reality you're not done? So let's say if I create a variable, okay, and then I am thinking about something, and then I kind of stop in the way, right? And at this point, uh, it would think that you're done, so it would execute it. I have disabled that, so it won't do it right now. Um, so that's why you would have this this run button. So which means when you're ready, you can run it. It won't automatically run. Okay, so let's just start with creating our first variable. I'm gonna say 0, and then if I console.log x and then semicolon and then run it, you would see 0, right? So because I clicked on it, it executes it. If I change the value, let's say to 1 and run it, uh, you would see 1, right? And let's say if you have all of these stuff and if you want to clear it, you can click here and it clears it. Okay, so these are very useful things that you need to know before you start so that um, you have a clear idea. Also, let's say if you have done something like this accidentally, right? Messed up the format. You can come here and then you can say format your JavaScript and it formats it nicely. These are only 2 lines, but if you have lots of lines, you can constantly keep doing this. So um, it's nicely formatted. Okay. Any questions? All right. So let's start with um, defining variables, right? I already defined a variable here. So let's understand what it is. So variables is, how do I say this? Um, variables are these things that you create inside your code that helps you to hold stuff in the memory. For example, when you're cooking in the kitchen, right? Let's say you're building some recipe, okay? And that recipe requires, some tomatoes and onions and some oil and whatnot, right? So in that case, let's say you are boiling the water, but and then you're cutting the tomatoes. Then you're gonna hold a tomato that you cut in some small, um, uh, pot or somewhere, right? Uh, so all of these things that you need to hold because ultimately you're gonna mix them all together to build your dish, right? So similarly in programming, while you are building, so programming is like building a recipe at the end of the day, right? But then you deal with a lot of things, and you need to hold those things um, somewhere in the memory of your computer, right? And that you can do using variables. Variables have basically three components. One is when you define a variable, you have to use a keyword called a let. This is one way of defining a variable that goes on the left side. Then you need a variable name. In this case, I've created a very simple name X, okay, which is not very meaningful. Uh, and then you have an equal sign, which is an assignment operator, which says, okay, whatever is on the right side gets assigned to the left side. Okay, so I am setting the value of X to be 1. Okay, so what happens when you do that? The X, which now holds 1, uh, gets saved in some sort of a temporary memory. Okay, it's called heap. You don't need to know about what it is and all that stuff, but imagine if you have like a locker room, a giant locker room, and let's say you want to save, you want to put your stuff inside a locker room, right? So you would open a locker, and then one of the lockers, and you put your, let's say, cell phone inside, right? And then close it, you get a key, right? So that key is your variable. So let's say, you know, uh, so X is basically nothing but your locker key, right? And then 1 is a content of your locker, right? So whenever you need that cell phone from your locker, you have to use that key, right, to open it and grab it. Now in programming, it's much simpler. You don't see it happening in reality, but that's what it does, right? So when I create a variable called X and I set a value to 1, what happens is um, the JavaScript basically goes and open a specific memory on your computer's heap and then puts 1 inside. Okay. And in reality, there is some, like a memory number that every memory has assigned. So this X holds that reference to that memory, right? Now, what that is, we don't know, and we don't really care. As long as we have this key, we can open it, right? In olden days, if you learned like C++ and other language, it will actually give you the reference to that. Um, but in JavaScript, which is a modern language, you don't need to do that, right? So that's how it works. And so let's say console log is a mechanism to print your variable value into this area called console. Okay, so if I run it now, what's going to happen? This is where it gets assigned. And then when I run this console.log, whatever I put it between this parenthesis, um, it's basically said, okay, print the value of X. So then it says, okay, what is the value of X? So it will go and open that memory and then find whatever is inside. It gets passed here, and console is basically responsible for printing it here. That's all it does, right? This is a pre-built functionality in JavaScript. Anytime you want to print something uh, here, you can pass it within this parenthesis, and it would get printed. Okay. Um, you can directly pass something. So let's say if I pass 2 and run this, it would print 2, right? It doesn't have to be saved in the memory like X, but um, if I do this, it just prints a value. Okay. Console log, you can actually print multiple values with comma. So let's say if I want to do print, let's say this is X, okay? And then I would say X. So I'm printing two things. I'm printing this string, which is just some message, so I know what I'm printing, right? This is almost like an instruction. So because if I use lots of these console logs, I don't know which one is printing what, right? I could have like a Y and Z and all this, and I could be printing those. But how do I know which one is gets printed here, right? So for that, if I just put a label, this is almost like a label, right? Uh, or you can actually do this. This is probably even better. I can simply say X equal to, right? Which makes much more sense. And it prints it like this. Okay, this is one way. You can actually you can actually do this. Also, you can use a plus sign. What it does is basically it takes this string and this value and it concatenates, and so you get another string. This is also another way of doing this, right? So you can pick whichever way you like. So you must be wondering why do we need this console log, right? In your program, oftentimes what happens is that uh, this is a very simple one, but let's say I write code, I write hundreds of lines of code every single day, right? Uh, one of my program has probably uh, 70 to 80,000 lines of code, right? And when I run this code, if there's an issue, I don't know what's happening, right? So console log helps me debug whatever is happening. So let's say if this X supposed to be 2 and I run this and it's 1, then I know something is wrong, right? Or it is possible that it says, oh, X is not even defined, which means I know there's something went wrong in my code, right? So I can fix it. So this is console log helps me um, understand that uh, in detail. And another use for console log is you can, it's almost like it behaves like an output, right, of your program. So you can use that as well. So any questions?
Is it important to have like spaces between?
Spaces between, you mean this here?
Yes.
So
X.
yes. So the way JavaScript works is it's pretty much I can leave as many spaces I like. It does not really matter. Um, the way it knows that my line finishes is using this semicolon, and even that is not required technically, but I would always suggest that um, you know that you would always do that, right? So this way you know when things starting and when things ending, right? uh, so if I run this, it would work as well like it was before, right? But what you don't want
Mm,
to do is you don't want to mix things. So I cannot just don't put spaces in between. Now it does not know what this is, right?
right.
Because there is no keyword called let x, right? So you do want to put spaces. And as I said, even if you put a lot of spaces, because if you have like really fat fingers and you just typing away and sometimes you put more spaces than needed, you can simply come here and then just, say format your JavaScript and it fixes things automatically.
So the good practice is to have like a space. For
Yes.
example, X equals 1. So we
Yes.
would put
One
mhm.
space, basically.
Okay. Mhm.
Okay. And we'll learn more about spaces as we go along because uh when you get more complex code, uh you would need to also put tabs, right? But in this case, it's in the same scope, so you don't need tabs, but we'll look at when we look at like a for loops and all that stuff. It's almost like we're creating a tree of the code, and then tab is kind of the way to recognize, where the scope begins and where it ends. Um, okay, so another thing that we want to learn also, oh, somebody asked a question. Okay, NGS, is there any other types of variable in JS? Yes. So yeah, we're gonna look at the variable types in a minute. This is a number, right? So X is a number. Y is a number because it's a numeric value, right? 1, 2, 5, 2.5, 0, -5. They're all numbers. And the way JavaScript behaves is when you set the value, so let's say if I say x equal to 1, JavaScript decides what the type of the variable is based on its assignment. So if I set 1, which is a number, it will set as a number, right? And you can actually find out what type it is. You can do, what is it called? Type of. So if I do, let's do this. Type of x equal to, and I'm just going to say plus type of x. Let me clear it. And you can see it says it's a number, right? So if I simply do type of x, it tells me what is a type, right? And there are other different types, which we're going to look at it. But type of is a great way to see what it is, right? In other languages like C, C++, they would actually put the type in front. So you would have to say this is a number or string or whatnot. And so you would write something like this. If it was a, let's say C++, you would write something like this. You would say string x. I even forgot the syntax. But let's say if they were using let keyword, then you would have to say let x don't quote me on the syntax because it's been a while. Okay, something like this, which means, well, in this case, it's a number, and in Java, in C++, there are different kinds of different numbers. But let's say this is an integer, so you would do something like this. And if you put a wrong type, it will give you an error. But JavaScript is very flexible, which means you don't have to do any of that. You simply say x equal to 1, and it derives basically the type based on the value you provided. Okay. The cool thing is you can then change it. Let's say if I want to say x equal to 3, okay, it will let you do that. Yes. Yeah, I'm just going to keep, and then this is the type of, and I can also put another console, value of x equal to, right? So it's going to print two things, type of x and value of x. So type of x is number and value of x is 2. Okay. I can actually change it here to blah, which is a string, right? It's no longer a number. So I can define as a number and I can change it to a string. It allows it. I would not recommend it, but it allows it to do it. So it's very flexible. So now it says type of x is string, value of x is blah. How about I'll give you a few minutes to try this out, okay, yourself, and see how it works. Let me know. And let me know if you are having some error, because the first time you're typing, you're always going to have something not working because you might make a typo or miss something somewhere and it would complain, right? So let me know if that's happening. We can fix it.
I have a question.
Sure.
Like, why do we need to type of twice?
Type of twice. You mean here?
Yeah.
So this is just a message. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So again, we're going to learn. So this is almost like a label. Okay. This is the actual value that we're printing, right? So when I read this, it makes sense, right? Type of X
Right,
equal to string. I wanted
right.
to have a meaningful messages coming out of this code. And so what I did, if I could have just done this, right? But then if I had, let's say, some other variables and I'm printing, I don't know what is what printing what. So I always put some sort of label in front of it, right? Uh, what I'm printing. Again, I can just print whatever, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. Because I put within the quotes, it's just a string and it will print, that thing regardless of it, right? You can see that. So,
Mhm.
yeah. Anyway, having a good habit while coding is pretty important because then, you know, uh, oftentimes as a developer, and I can tell you about myself, when I started, I was learning programming on Surface. When I say Surface, it means I I had, no idea what was going on inside underneath the hood, right? uh, it's important to know what's going on underneath the hood. So when you get stuck, you can fix it and you can move forward, right? Most of the early programmers are frustrated and give up programming because um, when the bugs happen, they have no idea what's going on. And that is frustrating. And to be honest, doesn't matter how much you learn, you will have bugs and you will get frustrated every step of the way. But uh, knowing these stuff in earlier, you will have less and less bugs. And when that happens, you can clearly see what's happening and you can quickly fix it and move forward. And that's a trick. So it's almost like when you're cooking, right? Somebody gives you a recipe, say, okay, heat the oil in, this much temperature at this much temperature, and then put some something inside like a salt and pepper, whatever. Um, then you always want to ask the question, why am I heating at this degree? Why not some different degree, right? Once you get the answer, you understand if you do it something differently, then you will have a different result, right? So programming is exactly the same way. You want to ask the right question. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Once you know the answer, you can um, control it, right? Okay, everyone tried it? Uh, anyone's having issues with this? Otherwise, we can move forward.
I have a question. Why do we need to know it's a string or a number?
Why do we need to know? That's a great question. Um, because they're different, right? Uh, let's say, okay, let's say you have an accounting application, right? And you're adding two numbers, and somehow one of the things that, let's say, you think they're both numbers, but let's say one of them is a string, like this, right? It's a string, but it's also a number, but it's actually a string, right? Because um, you know, strings have quotes. We haven't learned that, but you know, numbers don't have quotes around it, right? So this is the difference, right? So uh, if you don't know, it would render some weird results. Okay. Uh, Let me give you an interesting example. So let's say if you have a let x equal to 1, let y equal to also 1. If I do console log x plus y, what do you think I'm going to get?
1.
No.
1
Well,
plus 1.
1 plus 1 plus 1 would be 2, right? 2, right? But if you run it, you'll get 11.
Okay.
It's because they're both strings, and the way if you add strings together, they just concat. They just put them together, right? They don't really behave like numbers, right? So that's why you need to know if something is a string or a number, so you can actually control it, right? If there were numbers, if I have, let's say, 1 and 1, right? And you can also see the color change in your editor. It will tell you. You would see like this, right? Does it answer a question?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay, cool. Professor, do you want to say something? Do you have?
Well, I guess for this one, something that I did struggle a lot when I was starting with JavaScript, it was when I was getting undefined. And I know if we sometimes we declare variables, but we forgot to assign values. So that's another thing that can happen. Yeah, this part just at the beginning, that's something I want to add. And
Yeah.
and definitely not paying attention on the types that can insert really bad bugs. But I don't know if Professor, if you can show them that undefined. It's just like, yeah, not declaring, not adding value. It's very important to assign a value and the correct value to the variables.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Thank you. So let's say, you know, as I said, JavaScript is very forgiving. There are a lot of things you can do that works, but it actually doesn't work as you expected, right? So, for example, I can create a variable without setting a value. Okay. There are cases where you want to do that. Because when you define the variable, let's say you have no idea what the value to set, and then later on you set some value because at that point you have some context, right? Or you simply you put a default value. Okay, so I'll give you a great example. Let's say if you have age in your program, right? You don't want to put 0 as the age, right? Because what is the meaning of 0 as age? Has no meaning. I don't know. You're not born. I don't know. It's kind of bad, right? I would rather not put any value, which means I don't know the age. Okay. So in this case, if I console log it and run this, I would get something called undefined. So remember, I gave you the locker scenario, right? Let's say if you create a variable but don't assign a value to it, and it needs to put this in a memory, you will basically lock an empty locker, right? That you have access to, but there's nothing inside, which is fine if it's intentional, right? So in this case, JavaScript basically say, okay, you haven't put anything inside. So if you try to access it, it will say there's nothing inside. And the way it says nothing inside it, you will get something called undefined. Okay, it's a placeholder for empty value in a way. You never want to intentionally set your value to undefined. That's not a good idea. There's another way to clean stuff up, go back to its previous value, but we're not going to look at it right now. But just remember that you know if you create a variable, if you declare a variable, and if you don't set a value, there has to be a good reason for that, right? Um, but if I want to say how much money I have, right, I can set to 0 because this makes sense. Money 0 makes sense. Age 0 doesn't make sense, right? So yeah, so that's how um, you can in there are cases I have used this a few times, but most of the time I would look at the case and always set the value. Almost like 99% of the time I would have a value. Only there's like a 1% chance that I don't know the value of my variable. Okay. And again, once we write some meaningful code, then you would know, you will get the context. Okay. Any question on this one? Okay. So the next topic, oh yeah, comments. These are important things. Comments. So let's say you write some code and today, and the product can be, you have to support this product for a long time, right? Let's say 1 year later, you try to modify that code. And, you know, if you're like me, my memory is pretty messed up. I don't remember a lot of things. So if I go back and I'll say, I've written this code, but I don't know what it does. So how do I can let myself know that this is the rationale behind this code? So what do? You write a comment, and then a comment in JavaScript is written using 2 slashes. Okay, so you would write 2 slashes, and then you would write, this is the money I have. Okay, obviously don't write comments that are very obvious because it doesn't make sense. Because you're gonna be wasting space, right? But always write a comment when you write complicated logic, or you think that you're gonna forget what that means, right? Or sometimes you do a hack, so you would say, uh, this is a hack. Uh, I don't. I usually write this literally. I don't know the right solution. So to do, fix it later. Okay. So let's say you're bored and you say, well, let me fix some of the stuff that I've written. You can go back and search on to do, and you'll find this line and then you fix it. This is one reason why you write comment. So yeah, you write comment because you want to put the rationale. Oftentimes what happens, let's say I'm working on a project, and then let's say I had to, I found a new job, I leave, and they would hire some other guy to do my job. And as if I didn't have any comments in my code, that guy is gonna suffer a lot because it's got no idea what my code does, right? It's got some general idea, but when it goes inside, you know, it's very hard to know. So comments would help you navigate. You can write actually multi-line comments. To write multiple line comments, you would do something like this. You would have a slash and then asterisk, and then you would have an opening and closing. And then here you would just write anything. This is a long comment, right? This is a short comment. Let's try this. The comments are something that your compiler completely ignores. It doesn't do anything. That's why you can put any string inside. You can put just all the rubbish. So, Professor, any interesting comments that you ever written that you?
I don't know if that interesting, but sometimes when my code is not working, I comment chunks of code while I'm fixing.
Oh,
Another
nice.
way to do in comments.
That's an important point. So yes, thank you. So what you do is sometimes, you try something, right? So for example, that's a good point. Let's say you have this line, okay? You tried it, and when I run it, it breaks. Okay. So I know that this is partially right, but there's some issues with it. So what I would do is I would just comment it out, right? Which means it's there. It's not visible to the compiler, but I can anytime if I want to go back and fix it and activate it, I can do that. Okay. To remove a comment, if you're on Mac, you can do command / and it removes the comment. If I just do same thing, it adds it. I think on a PC must be control /. So this is very useful. I think you can do the same thing here as well. But then if you add it back, usually I don't like multi-line comments. I would just do this, right? The only time I would write multi-line comments is like on the top of a function or like a top of the file. What I would put a long description about what it's all about, right? In that case, I would use that this kind of comment. But inside the code, I would just use /, right? I would basically break it down into a long comment into smaller ones. Okay. Um, hmm. So yeah, so far we covered creating a variable, um, adding a comment. We looked at how to debug. Oh yeah, how to debug more carefully. This is something that I learned. Sometimes console log work properly, but sometimes it's very hard. So I like to do is, um, and this is especially true when you have really large code. And I remember there was one guy in my team. He just likes to put console logs everywhere, right? So you'll have like literally 50 or 60 console log in your code, right? And then let's say if I come in and I change something and I added another console log, right? And I run it, and it's printing all these values that I don't know where they're coming from. And I cannot differentiate mine from his, right? So in that case, I can do either two things. I would just go in here and I just, you know, I would just say this is, or instead of putting, because he would also have those, you know, information about comments. So I would just literally go like this. Okay. And then run it. And if I see all these A's, then it's mine, right? And it's not something that, oh, there's no money, right? That's why I just put something here.
Because it's in the comment in the line 10. Oh, okay, got it.
Yeah. Yeah, because I commented out this money part, that's why, yeah. So I can differentiate here, right? Again, this console is actually a CodePen console. It's not a real console, to be honest. This has limitations, okay? I mostly use it because for a couple of reasons. When I'm using CodePen, I can get quick information here. But this console is not very helpful when I'm printing very large object and things like that. So then I have to rely on something called browser console. So your browser actually has a console, and you can open it if I right click on my browser and a menu opens up. This is true when you're using Chrome. Safari and Firefox might have different, and also what is it? Microsoft browser. Since I don't use it, what is the name of the Microsoft browser? Not Explorer, but something else, right?
It's for Mozilla? No.
No, Microsoft Edge browser. Thank you, Angie. Yeah, so Edge browser. It might have a difference. So see if you can see this. So if I right click on it, and do you see inspect here? If you have a Chrome, then you would definitely see it. If you're on different other browsers, you might have to find a different way. Let me know if you're having that issue. Can everyone try that? Do they see this inspect? Okay, looks like everyone can. I'm assuming. Okay, who doesn't? Yes, it has it. Okay, cool. Okay, Edge also has it. Cool. Mostly you're going to be using either, if you're on Mac, you're going to be using Chrome or Safari. I don't use Safari that much, but yeah. I think in Safari you have to enable it, but yeah, if you have Chrome, you can open it. So if I go and click on inspect, now here's a caveat. Because CodePen is has a limited space, you would see kind of things kind of getting messed up. So you have very limited space here. And if you do this, it gets into some completely different mode, right? So you just have to be, reopen it. Okay. Okay. So let's understand how this console works. So this is a browser console. Um, and the objective of a console is to debug your code, right? Because your browser browser has, works in HTML, it has CSS, and it also has JavaScript, and it also has other stuff, but these are three main components, right? Which means it needs to, you should be able to see what's going on. So for example, let's say I want to look at where is this coming from, right? So what I'll do is I'll just right click on it and I would say inspect. Okay. And it would take me to exactly that line. Then you took me to a different line, but anyway, right here. Okay. And I can open up here and it will highlight that line. Oh, right, this one probably. It will highlight this line. And if I keep opening, at some point you would see this. You can see the console, the log, and all of these. It's formatted differently because it's a browser, right? It's basically a website or web application, right? This is so the way it prints everything is differently. But you can actually see what's going on here, right? And I can actually change it if I want to. If I can go in here and let's say, hey, I want something else. I can go and edit this. Um, you know, edit this. Instead of console, I can write. I would not recommend doing this, but you can edit this directly from here. Okay. But if you, as soon as you refresh it, it goes away, right? I would not advise it, but just to, sometimes I do this just to see how, if something fits. So let's say if I've written some application and it has, let's say, limited space, and I want to know how big, I, content can it support, and I'll just go and modify it to see, how big content can support. Okay, so let's look at how to debug this, right? So let's put back the console log, and then let's write, let's say, let x equal to 1, and then I would write let y equal to 2. Let's put semicolons here, and then let z equal to 3. And I'm also going to change the value of x equal to 2, right? And then y equal to 5. Okay. So I've written a bigger code. Now, I want to know here exactly what is the value of x and y. So as I said, you can put console log, but let's say if I want to mess around with it, I can use something called debugger. Okay. When I put a debugger here, it means it will stop the execution here. So how do you start here? Let's see. Yeah, if I click on the run button here, right? What's going to happen is it's going to execute this line, and it would stop right here. You can see it paused. So I can see my code here, right? Now, I want to know at this point, what's the value of x? I can simply hover over it, and you can see it's 1. If I hover over it, you can see it's 2, right? You can actually see it all here. There are, you would see, oh, I haven't put any, you can see the script, the value of, you can see x is 1, y is 2, and the z is undefined, right? Because I haven't defined z yet. So at this point, it's not, right? So this is a great way to see what's happening. Um, and you can put multiple of these. And then once I'm done, I can click here and resume, and then it, you know, uh, goes away. I can actually do this. So if I run this again, and it stops, right? Let's say if I don't wanna, I wanna go step by step what's happening. So what I would do is I would click here, which is called step into the next function. Okay, so if I click here, it goes here, right? So now the value of z is still undefined because this hasn't been executed, right? So I'm gonna go one more time. Now you can see it's 1, 2, and 3, right? And then this is not executed. So I'm gonna go again. And so now x is 2, no longer 1. I can actually see things played out as, as it moving. So um, again, hopefully for this class, you don't have to do this. But you never know. Sometimes, when you write your code, you get stuck and you don't know what's going on. This is really helpful. All right. Any questions? All right. So yeah, we covered the let's cover types. And then that should be it. There are three main types in JavaScript. This is called primitive types. So let's say if I ask your name, it's only going to be one value, right? Even if you have like three names in the sense, first, middle, and last. If I ask your name, you're going to say all three in one. So I can, so for example, my name, I can put, right? It's a simple value. So this is called string, right? Because I am using these double quotes. Okay. So anytime you see quote, or you can also put single quotes, there are also strings, right? You can also do this, which is kind of interesting. This is called backtick. It also works. But typically you would just use double quotes. It's your preference, right? So if you see basically quote wrapping something, you already know this is a string. Okay. No other things in JavaScript has quotes around. So this is a uniqueness of it, right? Then a number. Okay. I'm secretly disclosing my age. Add a lot of numbers to it, and that's okay. So this is a number. What's the characteristic of number? Anyone? What is the difference between these two?
No semicolons.
Semicolon is there. Semicolon is not part of the value.
Not semicolon, but like quotation marks.
Yeah, no quotes around it.
Right.
Wrapping,
Yeah.
right? So if I put quotes around it, becomes a string, right?
Yeah.
So it's no longer, but a number is also something, it needs to have a numerical value. So strings, you have quotes around, right? Numbers, you have numerical value, right? I cannot have this as a number, even though there are no quotes around it. This is not a number, right? It needs to be a numerical value. And numerical values are, 21 or 21.5, 0, -1. These are all numerical values, right? So it needs to be numerical value, and no quotes, right? So this is this distinction. There's a third type called Boolean. Anyone know what Boolean is? There was a French mathematician. His last name was Boolean. Okay. And the value of Boolean is, so what kind of true or false, right? So if I say is raining, I can say it's true, right? Okay. Or in this case, it'd be false, right? Because not raining here. So what is the difference between this and this? No quotes around, first of all, and fixed values. true or false, right? Only two possible values and no quotes. That's it, right? So if you see anything that any kind of like a word that doesn't have any quotes around, but that is not also false or true, it doesn't belong as a value, right? So I cannot say blah here, right? There's no quote around, which means it's not a string. It's not a Boolean because it's not true or false. It's not numerical because it's so it's not a number, right? Which means this is an invalid variable. So, okay. So there are these three different types. And there's one more type that we looked at, which is undefined, right? Which is automatically set when you declare a variable, but not set the value. These are called primitive data types. It's, usually the meaning of primitive, it's kind of old and simple, right? I would I would take it as simple. This is very primitive, which means simple. I don't know why they call it primitive data type, but I would say more simple. So let's say if I ask you, can you tell me the ages of everyone in this class? I cannot use one of these, right? Because it's more complex. I have to create a list of everyone and their ages and all that. So there are data structures for that as well. But primitive data types, in terms of like simplicity, these are only three. There's a one more, which is kind of interesting. Empty value. So I can say, let nothing equal to. Anyone know what that is? This is null. This unfortunately is not a primitive value. So JavaScript is tricky. Null actually is a complex value, not a primitive value. But I'm just gonna give you this because the reason you use null is, remember, there are two empty values in JavaScript, undefined and null. Undefined is when you create a variable, but you don't set the value, it's automatically undefined, right? Null is you intentionally set something to nothing, right? It's almost like when you got a locker, but you didn't put inside anything, right? That's your undefined. Null is you had something in the locker, you removed it, and now there's nothing. And that's null. Okay. So these are different data types. We're going to look at them later next class, but I thought I should give you a preview of it since somebody asked in the beginning, right? So because you need to distinguish between, all these different things. Okay. So make sure you remember that. It's not very hard. Professor, did I miss something here? I think I covered all of it.
It looks pretty good, but the only thing that I would recommend is for the string, if you decide to use double quotes or single quotes, please keep your code consistent. Do not mix, like, I don't know, some variables with double quote, the other ones with single. Yeah, just to keep it clear and start building good habits from the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's a very good point. The only time I would mix it is within the same line. So I don't want to do this. So like name equal to like in the double quotes and the next line something equal to, something, right? I never want to do that, even though it would work. As I said, JavaScript are forgiving. It would say, oh yeah, I don't really, we don't really care. Obviously, you cannot start with a single quote and end with a double quote or something like that. That kind of doesn't work, but um, this would work, but it's not a good practice, right? Because it's it kind of messes up your readability in a way. Okay. And specifically because you work in a, when you code, you don't work solo. You work in a team environment, right? So somebody likes to write single quote, someone likes to write double quote. So, you know, you need to figure out the best standard and then use it. The only time I want to mix it is for this. What if I want to write a statement? So let's say if I want to write a statement. This is a example of a single quote. Okay. Right. So I have a double quote and inside I have a single quote because I want to, let's say if your sentence itself has quotes around it. And what if you have a double quote example where you would say, let this is an example of right? So it's a single quote inside a double quote or double quote inside a single quote. And this works, but again, this kind of breaks your pattern. There is a solution for this as well, where you can have double quotes inside a double quote, but I'm not going to go into it right now, right? But this is a much simpler solution. Okay. Cool. Any other question on this one? Remember, there are no dumb questions. If you have question, always ask. Right, cool. Okay, awesome. And then the last thing we want to cover is we used let to define a variable, right? There's another way of defining a variable called const. Okay. Um, it basically helps you define a variable, just like let. But const is um, used to define constants. Anyone remember a very famous constant? There are a lot of constants in the world.
Is that pi?
Pi, yes. So I can say pi is 3.14, right? So this is a constant. And the way you write it is you always use uppercase. If you write lowercase, it still is a valid syntax, but as a good practice, I always want to use uppercase. So then if I look at the variable, I know this is a constant, right? Another example of constant would be, let's say if you're writing a program and there is something that you never want the program to change, right? Let's say that used throughout your project, but you don't want that any program to change, right? Because what happens if you have a variable defined using let, you can define it a value and then you can change it, right? In the next line. Const, you can't do that. So I cannot say 2 like this. If I run this, it would say assignment to a constant variable. I think you cannot do this either. You cannot do this either. And it says a missing initializer, right? A reason for this is once the initialization, you cannot use const, you cannot change the value again, which means if you did this, then you have to eventually do this, right? And this is setting a new value, right? Because here it's undefined and here is 3.14. This is not allowed. That's why it will always force you to define the variable and assign the value in the same line for const. So const is almost like a precaution, right? To tell the code that if somebody tries to change this, stop them, right? So in your code, pretty much everything would change except, those like pi. There are other constants like a Planck constant. I mean, if you're a physicist, there are other constants, right? Value of E, which is 2.17 and things like that. You would have to define it or it won't run it. Yes. Yeah, if you just did this, right? And if you execute it, it would say, missing initialization, right? But if this was a let, no problem. Right? Professor, your experience with let and const.
My well, but I'm using mostly LED because with the but you will also find if you look for resources like bar, but we don't use that because it's an old code, and also you can insert bugs because it doesn't keep the scope in the program. So if you want to watch something that's old that's using bar, it's okay, but just keep in mind that it's better to use LED. So we recommend that it's better practice. And here, like I think I was using one time the cons for a date. So that was another one that we were assigning the date.
Oh, okay.
Like a formula to calculate a date. So we'll be updating, but that was another time. And definitely using uppercase is going to help you to find them fast, especially if you're using it somewhere else. Just by seeing there's uppercase, the variable that you're using, that's a constant, that's not going to change. So it gives you like a different idea of how to use this variable.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because yeah, so we covered let and const, but there is something called var. So there's a little history on var. So there's a var. So I can define a variable using var. The only, let's say if I would say x equal to 1. Okay. This was old way of doing things. When JavaScript was first created, there was only one way to create a variable, var. And there were some like odd practices that were being used that were not very friendly. For example, if there's something called hoisting, which we're not going to go into it, but there were a lot of problems with this, this way of doing things. And also there was no way to create no cleaner way to create a constant in old JavaScript. So a newer JavaScript, the they have moved it to two ways of defining variable, let and const. And we no longer use var. Okay. And if you find a resources that is using var, that's pretty old. So, and again, I think JavaScript, it's not that old. JavaScript was invented or created around in, I think 96 or so. And so it's not that old, but it has evolved quite a bit because it's the heart of, your browser. Everything works on JavaScript, and we deal with it pretty much every single day because, it's everywhere, right? If you use your cell phone, that's running JavaScript. If you use a computer browser, that's running JavaScript, right? A lot of application on your phone running JavaScript. Even this browser itself is probably built using JavaScript. Okay. There's something called Electron, which is like a server side. I mean, you can write JavaScript, to build applications on your computer as well. So JavaScript is pretty much everywhere, right? And it's evolving. So there are different versions of it. So one way to look at it is, let me, ES6. So there are different versions. It's called ECMAScript. Okay, ECMAScript is a different name of JavaScript. This is more official name, and it's I forgot the full form. It's kind of weird. What is it called? Let's look at it. Is it standard for scripting, including? Anyway, it's a long name, and there is actually a body of folks who are constantly working on it, and they're releasing new versions, right? And you can also check the version history, and so you must be asking, how does the version impact me, right? So whenever your Chrome gets updated, right? So remember, you get notification that new Chrome is like here, you can see the new Chrome is available, right? That means it's ready to download. If I click on it, it will download the new version of Chrome. It will have a new version of JavaScript as well. So you can be sure that it has some sort of tiny changes, right? JavaScript is very evolving really fast. So how do you keep up with it? Let's say if I've written some code in a completely newer syntax, and and if I run on my grandmother's computer, which hasn't been updated in ages, how would it work, right? So there's something called transpiling. So if I've written something using, let's say, let, and I can run through this transpiler, which will convert into var, and that would run on any browser, any old browser. Okay, so that's how most of the companies they work. But now I think that var syntax is almost extinct because most of the browsers, the amount of browsers that they are out there, I think probably maybe 0.01% is using like old IE 11 or those browsers, right? People who never open their browser since 90s, suddenly they open it and things won't work, right? That would happen rarely. So, but mostly, most of the new computers have the latest stuff, and this is how we keep up with it, called transpiling. We're not going to cover the transpiling in this course, but just to know how the different version works on your browser, right? So I think that's pretty much it. Pretty much all that we needed to cover today. Professor, do you want to cover anything else?
Well, I prepared a presentation, but I think for the first time I'm doing JavaScript, this is a lot of information.
Okay.
So if they can review I will pass the presentation. I mean, it's like a little summary of things that we're reviewing today, and I will post it in the in Discord,
Okay.
the link. But I think what this professor's point is great, and if you can review the video and do the practice and do the quiz, that would be great.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, this is the beginning, so I think, it's hard to write anything meaningful. That's why the homework is almost like it's a quiz. But after a couple of classes, you will. I think it's in both. Right. It's 162L has it, and then 168 also should have it, Professor. Or did you import it, right? Okay. Yeah, both classes should have it. The same material. So as we discussed that, we're gonna split at some point, right? So the initial part, the JavaScript is pretty much the same, and then at some point we'll split into 2 classes. Okay. All right. So I think that's about it. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to ask on the Canvas or on the Discord. I'll put this video in the Discord, so you can always refer to what is our Discord? Life. Hold on. Sometimes I forget which one is our Discord. I think these are some folks who were not there last time, so
Is it okay to put it in the Canvas?
yeah.
Because there'll be like a lot of messages and it may get lost.
Yeah. Let just invite those folks who did not join last time, so they're up to date. Yeah, I think I'll put it in the okay, yeah. So Professor shared the link, so you can look at it, click on it, and join. There is a okay, so NG, yeah. So the way it's gonna work is 162 and 168. The way it's going to work is 162 and 168. They both have like a fundamental knowledge of JavaScript, right? So that's why we combine them for the beginning JavaScript part, right? So we're going to learn how to define variables, data types, operators, for loops, the arrays and all that stuff, right? So we're gonna cover the fundamentals of JavaScript in the beginning for the both classes. So you will see the material on the both sides, and then after that, which is close to like a midterm, we will split, where 162 will go into more React, and 168 would go more towards using JavaScript to manipulate DOM and things like that, right? So that's how we're gonna have a split. But I think because both classes needs the knowledge of JavaScript, we kept it together for the beginning part. Make sense? Okay, sounds good. Yep. So we'll put the video on the Discord, and then there'll be lessons in the Canvas for each week, which are much shorter and sweeter. So you can, if you want to know, okay, how to define a variable, you can click on the individual video, which should not be more than like a few minutes, so you can have a quick knowledge of that. Okay.
I want to add that we also share some resources in the Discord channel, like for Free Code Camp, Treehouse, and also the JavaScript book. So please try to go over those as well, because practice is what is going to make you master this code. So yeah, and this is like on your own. So we also recommend to commit to something like 100 days to code. You don't have to be coding hours. Even 30 minutes can make a difference. So yeah, and I don't know if the students that I gave the GitHub workshop are here, but you can push that to your GitHub. So just that to keep track.
Cool, thank you. Oh yeah, and Angie asked, so those who are enrolled in both classes, 168 and 162, for the beginning part, at least in the beginning JavaScript, the homework's going to be same, right? So how to deal with that? That's an important question. Either you can post the same thing in both canvas. Okay. Yeah. Because
I think that's good.
Yeah, that's fair. The only things are quizzes, right? Because you have to quiz if it's a quiz, then you have to take in both classes. I think it's an advantage. Let's say if you have few wrong ones in one class, you can go and fix it in the other class. So you get a better grade in the other class. But yeah.
True, you can alternate the quizzes.
So okay. And if it's a big homework and somehow you can just let me know that, hey, you know what, I submitted this big homework in this class. Maybe, you can put it's mostly like you can actually submit your homework in a code pen, right? When we start coding. So all you have to do is just save the link and put it up in the canvas. So you just have to do twice. But for one work you get 2 credits, so that's a good thing, right? So okay. All right. Is there any last questions? Otherwise, we can stop here. All right. So that's
I have
it.
a question.
Sure.
Will we be working with GitHub?
I think later on, I would like you to work on a GitHub at some point because, but when we have a concrete project. So when we deal with the React, um, uh, I want you to create your profile. So there'll be like a final project. So that I want you to upload in a GitHub, and I'll show you how to do that. It's pretty simple. So this way, if you don't have a profile on your GitHub, you can create one and upload it. If you have an existing profile, you can use that to post your project there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyway, I think it's a good idea to use GitHub for your work, because in a real, like work, pretty much everything goes on a GitHub or similar system, right? So having that, learning the commands and regularly pushing things on it would help you, um, you know, um, get better at it. That is a one skill I wish I had learned in school when I went to one of my job where I was not using GitHub and suddenly everyone's using GitHub and I had no idea how to use it, and it was really a struggle. I had to learn by myself, and it was really a struggle. But now I use it every day, so I don't use
So,
GitHub, but I use similar system. Every company has different system, but it's based on a Git, which is the underlying technology. So if you learn Git, you already know GitHub and other stuff. So I'll cover that when the time comes. Yeah.
so is there any resources we could use to learn? Because it seems like simple, but yet it's very complicated.
Yeah, as I said, it's simple, but it's complicated. That's how I would describe it. If you learn it for the first time, it's very complicated, but once you learn it, it's a piece of cake, right? So maybe what I'll do, I think closer to the end, I will give you a quick demo of my favorite commands, and you can do the command line, or you can just do it by going in the GitHub and then, clicking around. You can do the same thing. And there's another way also. You can download something called GitHub Desktop on your computer.
Mhm.
So there are multiple ways, and I'll go over it so that before the final submission, so that you have enough time to practice. Okay.
Yeah, and then it's a good way of tracking your code.
Yeah. So once you
Right.
start, let's say once you begin your project, I will cover that, right? So you can create a project in a GitHub, and then regularly as you make progress, you push it, right? Because it is possible that you lose everything. One day you just accidentally delete something, right? And that's why GitHub is for it, to keep track of what you've done, and you have it on cloud, so it never goes away. All right. Cool. Thanks everyone for joining, and yeah, I'll see you guys next week. And thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we should stop the recording.
Okay.